Jayvon Williams was supposed to be on the boat with Nolan. He was Nolan's best friend. They had grown up together in Ocean Springs. They played together, ran together, spent their lives in each other's orbit the way best friends do when they grow up in the same small Gulf Coast city. Jayvon was supposed to be on the same vessel as Nolan when the group left for Horn Island on the morning of July 4th, 2026. The boat was full. So Jayvon got on a different boat. He arrived at the island separately, and as soon as he stepped onto the beach, Nolan found him. As soon as we got out there, Jayvon told the Sun-Herald, "He told me that he loved me." Those were the last words Nolan Wells ever said to his best friend. Standing on a barrier island 10 miles off the Mississippi coast on the 4th of July, surrounded by hundreds of people celebrating a holiday, Nolan found his best friend who had come on a different boat and told him that he loved him. And then, hours later, the boat that had brought Nolan to the island left without him, and his phone ended up in a house in Ocean Springs, and it took 15 minutes to get it back. 15 minutes. This is Forensic Disconnect, and today we are going through the specific account of Jayvon Williams, the best friend who was on Horn Island, who saw Nolan for the last time late that afternoon, who told CNN that nothing about the story of what happened adds up, and what his account, combined with the specific new detail about how Nolan's phone was retrieved, tells us about what happened on July 4th, 2026. Before we go further, subscribe and hit that notification bell. Here at Forensic Disconnect, we unlock the cases that deserve to be remembered. Subscribe. Let's start with Jayvon Williams and why his account is the specific account that changes how this case must be understood. There are two competing public narratives about what happened to Nolan Wells on Horn Island on July 4th. The first is Warren Hudson's narrative. Nolan chose to stay with a girl. He was asked to board and decided not to. It was his decision. The second is the account that Nolan's parents and Katie McCormick's sister have offered. Nolan would never have stayed alone. He always came back with the group. Something else happened. Jayvon Williams is not Warren Hudson. He is not Nolan's parents. He was on the island. He saw Nolan. He spoke to Nolan. He is the specific witness who occupies the space between the people who were on the boat and the family who knew Nolan all his life. And Jayvon Williams told CNN's Laura Coates, "I don't think that Nolan would say, 'Bro, I'm staying with this girl on the island, y'all go ahead and go back.' I've never known Nolan to stay back, watch friends leave. He's always been a guy where, if he rode with you, he's gonna come back with you. That's always how he's been every single time. Every single time." Jayvon said he told CNN authorities had not contacted him regarding Nolan's death at the time of his interview. He said he was willing to discuss anything because he had nothing to hide and wanted to help Nolan get justice. And then he said something specific that has not received enough attention in the national coverage of this case. "None of this adds up to me," he said. "This whole case thing, whatever. This whole situation, none of this adds up to me. The best friend who was on the island, the best friend who saw Nolan for the last time late that afternoon, the best friend who was not on the boat that left without Nolan, and who says none of it adds up." Now let's go to the phone. Because the specific new detail about how Nolan's phone was retrieved from that house in Ocean Springs is the most bombshell single piece of information to emerge about the phone since Christine Wansley confirmed it was found with one of the friends. Tashima Hands is Jayvon Williams' mother. After Nolan was reported missing, Christine Wansley was tracking her son's phone using Life 360. The app showed the phone's location. Not on Horn Island, not in the water where Nolan would eventually be found, but in Ocean Springs. At a house, where a group of people appeared to be hanging out. Tashima Hands went to that house. She went personally, to retrieve the phone of a missing boy whose mother was trying to find him. She arrived at the house. The lights were off. The teenagers inside took approximately 15 minutes to bring the phone out, 15 minutes to retrieve the phone of a missing 18-year-old. In those 15 minutes, Tashima said, the story about where the phone was changed. First, she was told the phone was in a friend's truck. Then she was told a girl would bring it out instead. Two different explanations. 15 minutes. A missing teenager's phone. When the phone was finally brought out, Christine Wansley had her son's device. The phone that had been on the island with Nolan. The phone that had left the island without him. The phone that Life 360 had tracked to this specific house in the possession of the group that had come home from Horn Island. The family believes the phone may have had content deleted from it. The FBI is conducting forensic analysis, and the specific 15-minute window in which the phone changed locations from a truck to a girl before finally being produced, the specific contradictions in how the phone's location was explained, is the specific detail that the investigation holds and the public is now examining. 15 minutes to get a missing boy's phone back. 2 contradictory explanations of where it was. The investigation has those 15 minutes in its record. Now, let's go to what Jayvon Williams told TMZ about the viral phone video, because his account adds a specific dimension that has been underreported. The video that circulated showing someone in a heated argument saying, "Give me my freaking phone." The video that Crump cited at the July 10th press conference as possibly featuring Nolan's voice was identified by Tristan Shepard as Shepard himself in an altercation with his girlfriend, not Nolan. Shepard. But before Shepard came forward, Jayvon Williams spoke to TMZ about the video, and what Jayvon said was specific. He could not confirm it was Nolan's voice because the voices sounded distant. But he added that the exchange sounded similar to another friend who got into an altercation on a boat while at the island. Williams said that friend acted hostile and upset during the incident, while parents on the boat tried to get him to leave. That account, a friend hostile and upset, parents on the boat trying to get him to leave, is a specific description of a specific incident that Jayvon witnessed or heard about on July 4th. An incident that is separate from the phone argument. An incident involving a friend who was hostile and upset, parents trying to intervene. What friend? What incident? What does that specific scene, hostile young man, parents trying to get him off the boat, tell us about the social dynamics on Horn Island and on the boats that day? Jayvon saw it. He described it to TMZ. The investigation has his account. Now let's also go deeper into what Jayvon's specific position on July 4th means for his credibility as a witness. Because Jayvon Williams was in a specific position that day that no other public witness occupies. He was not on the boat that left without Nolan. He was on a different boat. He arrived at the island separately. He saw Nolan after arriving. He had the last conversation that any friend has confirmed having with Nolan, Nolan telling him he loved him. And he left the island on his own boat, separately from the group whose account is most contested. He was not part of the bilge pump emergency. He was not on the CETO call. He was not one of the 7 people the dispatcher was told were accounted for and in good health. He was on a separate vessel, watching the holiday from a different vantage point. That specific position makes his account the most independent of any account that has been publicly shared. He did not have a stake in the decision to leave Nolan on the island. He was not making a decision about whether to tell Nolan to board. He was observing, arriving, seeing his best friend for what would be the last time. And he says, none of this adds up. Now let's also address something specific about what Jayvon's account tells us about the give, send, go. Because while Jayvon Williams was going to CNN and TMZ and saying none of this adds up, the 3 friends, Hudson, Patalo, and Seymour, launched a Give, Send, Go fundraiser to defend themselves against potential lawsuits and to pursue defamation claims. The fundraiser has raised more than $90,000. The 3 friends are raising money to pursue the people who have made false claims about them. At the same time, Nolan's best friend, who was on the island, who saw Nolan for the last time, who told authorities he had nothing to hide and wanted to help get justice, is saying none of this adds up. 2 parallel tracks. The friends raising money to pursue their accusers. The best friend saying the story doesn't fit. The grand jury will hear from all of them under oath. Now let's also address what Tashema Hand said specifically about the 15-minute retrieval and why those 15 minutes matter for the investigation's assessment of the phone. She arrived at the house. The lights were off. She was trying to get the phone of a missing boy whose mother had tracked it to that location. And it took 15 minutes. In those 15 minutes, 2 different explanations were offered for where the phone was. First, in a friend's truck. Then, a girl would bring it out, 15 minutes, 2 stories, 1 phone. Modern phone forensics can establish a timeline of the phone's activity. Every call, every message, every app opened, every location recorded, every action taken, up until the device was given to Tashima hands and ultimately returned to Christine Wansley. If the phone's activity shows that content was deleted in the window before Tashima arrived, during the 15 minutes or at any point after the group returned to shore, that deletion has a timestamp. The FBI's forensic analysis is ongoing. The 15-minute retrieval is part of the chain of custody record. Whatever the phone shows and whatever was on it and whatever was removed exists in the context of those 15 minutes and those two contradictory stories about where it was. The family believes content was deleted. The investigation is examining whether that belief is supported by the forensic record. 15 minutes, 2 stories, 1 phone. The FBI has it now. Now let's bring everything together. Jayvon's account, the phone retrieval, the give-send-go, the Friends Island visit, and think about what the complete picture looks like more than a month after Nolan Wells was found. Jayvon Williams, Nolan's best friend, was on Horn Island. He saw Nolan. Nolan told him he loved him. Jayvon left on a separate boat. He learned Nolan was missing. He said he has nothing to hide and wants justice. He said none of this adds up. Tashima Hands went to a house in Ocean Springs to retrieve Nolan's phone. It took 15 minutes. 2 contradictory explanations were given for where the phone was. The phone was eventually produced and returned to the family. The 3 friends on the boat launched a give-send-go and raised $90,000 to defend themselves and pursue defamation claims. They visited Horn Island on August 7th with a Trump defamation lawyer. The sealed autopsy is complete. The toxicology is pending. The phone forensics are ongoing. The grand jury is waiting. And the best friend who was there, who saw Nolan, who heard the last words Nolan said to him, who was not on the boat that left without him, says none of it adds up. Let's go deeper into the specific significance of what Jayvon said about the social dynamics on the island that day. Because the detail about the hostile friend and the parents trying to get him off the boat is a specific piece of information about the atmosphere on Horn Island on July 4th that has been underexplored. Jayvon told TMZ that a friend was acting hostile and upset during an incident on the island and that parents on a boat were trying to get that friend to leave. He described this in the context of discussing the viral phone argument video. He said the exchange in the video sounded similar to this friend. Who is the hostile friend? What was the incident? Who were the parents on the boat? Those specific questions point toward a set of social dynamics on Horn Island that go beyond the simple narrative of a holiday celebration. People were upset. Parents were trying to intervene. Someone was hostile enough that adults on a boat felt they needed to remove them from the situation. The investigation has Jayvon's account of this incident. The 60 witnesses interviewed by the Jackson County Sheriff's Office presumably include people who observed these dynamics. The UCN's 22-page report may contain photos or videos that capture some of this social environment. What the specific social dynamics of that day tell us, who was angry, who was being managed, who was trying to leave situations, is the specific contextual fabric in which Nolan's final hours unfolded. Not a clean holiday celebration. A complicated social environment with specific tensions and specific incidents that the witnesses observed. Jayvon was part of that environment. He was not on the boat that left without Nolan. He was watching from a separate vantage point. And what he observed about the social dynamics, a hostile friend, parents intervening, is the specific account that adds texture to the GPS data and the emergency audio and the phone in someone's possession. Now let's also address what Jayvon's comment to CNN, authorities had not contacted him, means for the investigation. He said this in an interview with Laura Coates, approximately 2 weeks after Nolan's death. Jayvon Williams, the dead teenager's best friend who was on the island that day, who saw Nolan for the last time, who said none of this adds up, had not been contacted by investigators. 2 weeks, 60 witnesses interviewed, and the best friend who was on the island and who has said publicly he has nothing to hide had not been reached. This is the specific gap that Ben Crump and the Wells family have been pointing to when they question whether the investigation has been conducted with the thoroughness this case requires. How thoroughly is an investigation being conducted if, 2 weeks after the death, the best friend of the deceased, who was on the island, who saw him last, who was willing to talk, has not been contacted? Jayvon said he was willing to discuss anything. He said he wanted justice for Nolan. He said, "I have nothing to hide. That's my boy, and I want him to find justice. The investigation presumably contacted him at some point after his CNN interview made it clear he was available, willing, and had specific knowledge. But the 2-week gap, the specific fact that in the initial weeks of the investigation, Jayvon Williams had not been interviewed, is the specific accountability question that the investigation's supporters need to answer. The grand jury will hear what Jayvon Williams said under oath. Under oath is different from a CNN interview or a TMZ conversation. Under oath, the specific details he knows, what he saw, what he heard, what Nolan said to him, what he observed about the social dynamics on the island, will be part of the official record. None of this adds up to me, he said. Under oath, he will tell the grand jury exactly what doesn't add up, and why. Now let's also think about what the specific moment, Nolan finding Jayvon as soon as he arrived and telling him he loved him, means in the context of everything that followed. Nolan Wells was 18 years old. He was on a holiday boat trip to an island with his friends. He was smiling in the dock photographs. He was the tallest person in the frame. And when he saw his best friend arrive on a different boat, the best friend who should have been with him but couldn't because the boat was full, the first thing he did was find him and tell him he loved him. That moment, the spontaneous expression of love for his best friend in the middle of a crowded holiday island, is the specific human detail that makes everything else harder to process. This was not a young man who was planning to stay alone on an island. This was a young man who found his best friend in a crowd and told him he loved him. And then, hours later, the boat left without him. And 15 minutes after the group returned to shore, a phone was produced from a series of contradictory explanations at a house with the lights off. And Jayvon Williams told CNN, none of this adds up. Now let's also address the specific significance of the 3 arrests for threats. Sacramento, Ohio, Illinois, in the context of Jayvon's account and the investigation's overall trajectory. 3 people from 3 different states were arrested for making threatening communications connected to the Nolan Wells case. A man from Sacramento was indicted by a federal grand jury for threatening messages sent to Ashley Cole on Facebook. A woman from Ohio was arrested for bomb threats to the George County Chancery Clerk and the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. An Illinois man was arrested for threatening witnesses. 3 states, 3 arrests, 1 case. These arrests tell you something specific about the scale and intensity of the public pressure on this investigation. People from California, Ohio, and Illinois are making threats serious enough to produce federal grand jury indictments and criminal arrests. The case has reached into communities across the country in ways that have produced criminal conduct in multiple federal jurisdictions. Jayvon Williams is navigating this environment while also being the best friend of a dead teenager whose death, he says, doesn't add up. He is speaking to CNN, to TMZ, to anyone who will listen, saying, I have nothing to hide. I want justice for Nolan. His voice is one of the few voices in this case that is not filtered through a lawyer's statement or a press release or an attorney's framing. He is speaking directly. He is saying what he knows and what he does not know. And he is saying, none of this adds up. The grand jury will hear him. Let's go deeper into what the specific moment of the phone retrieval tells us about the chain of custody and why those 15 minutes matter forensically. Tashima Hands drove to the house where Life 360 showed Nolan's phone. She was a family friend acting on behalf of Christine Wansley, who was trying to locate her missing son. She arrived at the house with the lights off. She asked for the phone. First explanation, the phone was in a friend's truck. Second explanation, a girl would bring it out. 15 minutes, 2 stories. Let's think about what those 2 stories mean in the context of a phone that the FBI is now forensically analyzing. If the phone was in a truck, a vehicle outside the house, it was in one location. If a girl was bringing it out, from inside the house, from a room, from wherever, it was in a different location. 2 different locations, offered as explanations in sequence in the 15 minutes before the phone was produced. That sequence, the changing story about where the phone was, is the specific detail that the investigation has in its chain of custody record. Not just that the phone was with the group, not just that it was tracked to a house, but that when a family friend arrived to retrieve it, the story about where it was changed. Modern phone forensics can establish a very precise timeline of what a device was doing in those 15 minutes. If the phone was in active use, if someone was opening apps, accessing files, deleting content, the forensic record will show it. If the phone was powered off to prevent Life 360 from continuing to track it, the forensic record will show when it went dark and when it came back on. The specific forensic question is, what happened to the phone in the 15 minutes between when Tashima arrived and when the phone was produced? The FBI has that answer. It is part of the ongoing forensic analysis. The family believes content was deleted from the phone. The 15-minute window is the specific window in which that deletion, if it occurred, may have taken place. 15 minutes. 2 stories. A phone that the FBI is now forensically examining. Now let's also address what Warren Hudson's most recent interview adds to the picture. Hudson gave an interview to Brandon Tatum, also known as Officer Tatum on YouTube, in which he and Tatum visited Horn Island together. In that interview, Hudson said something new that had not been part of his podcast account. Hudson said he alerted the Coast Guard after realizing Nolan never made it back. He said it was late at night on July 4th and he hadn't heard from Nolan, so he called Nolan's mother, Christine, who confirmed she hadn't heard from her son either. And then he called the Coast Guard. He called Christine first, then the Coast Guard. This means that at some point on the evening of July 4th, Warren Hudson, who had been on the boat that left Horn Island without Nolan, who had confirmed to the CETO dispatcher that everyone on board was accounted for and in good health, realized Nolan had not come home. He called the mother of the dead teenager, and then he called the Coast Guard. What time did he make those calls? What did he tell Christine when he called her? What did he tell the Coast Guard? The specific content and timing of those communications is information the investigation has. The grand jury will hear it. Hudson also said in the Brandon Tatum interview that he left Horn Island at 4:30 p.m., and when he got back to the mainland, he ate, slept, and went to another party. He was assuming Nolan was fine and would return on someone else's boat. He said that was a common practice, going to the island on one person's boat and returning on another. He left. He ate. He slept. He went to another party, assuming Nolan was fine. And then, late at night, he realized Nolan hadn't come back. And he called Christine, and then the Coast Guard. That sequence, leaving, eating, sleeping, partying, then realizing at night, is the specific timeline that Hudson has now placed in the public record through his interview with Brandon Tatum. Jayvon Williams was also tracking what happened that night. His mother, Tashima, was the one who retrieved the phone. Jayvon was the one who said none of this adds up. 2 friends, 2 accounts, 2 very different relationships to the events of July 4th and its aftermath. The grand jury will hear both. Now let's also address what Hudson said about Horn Island being dangerous. He told Brandon Tatum that the island is a fun place to anchor with friends, but it's also very, very dangerous. He said he knows other people who have died there before Nolan. Very, very dangerous. He knows other people who have died there. This is the specific context that Jackson County Coroner Bruce Lind also provided. Strong currents, history of drownings at the barrier islands. It is the same context that the official investigation's likely accidental drowning assessment is based on. An 18-year-old, a very dangerous island, strong currents, heavy alcohol intake, an accidental drowning. That is the official narrative. It may be correct, but Jayvon Williams was on that same very dangerous island. He saw Nolan in the afternoon. Nolan was alive and well and telling his best friend he loved him. And then, hours later, his phone ended up in a house in Ocean Springs, and it took 15 minutes and 2 contradictory explanations to get it back. Jayvon said, "None of this adds up. The grand jury will evaluate whether the dangerous island explanation or Jayvon's none of this adds up assessment is what the complete evidence supports. The sealed autopsy is ready. The phone forensics are ongoing. The grand jury is coming." Let's also go to what Jayvon's specific position, as the best friend who was not on the contested boat, means for the grand jury's evaluation of the competing accounts. The witnesses who matter most in this case fall into specific categories. There are the witnesses who were on the boat that left without Nolan, the 7 people who are the subject of the most contested accounts. There are the witnesses who saw Nolan on the island after the boat left, the people who confirmed the 6 p.m. sighting, and there is Jayvon Williams, who was on the island, who saw Nolan, who left on a separate boat, and who is therefore not in the category of people whose accounts are most directly in tension with each other. Jayvon is not being accused of anything. He is not defending himself through attorneys. He is not raising money on GiveSendGo to pursue defamation claims. He is speaking directly on the record to CNN and TMZ saying, "I was there, I saw him," and none of this adds up. His specific credibility as a witness comes precisely from his position outside the contested events. He was not on the boat. He was not making the decision to leave. He was not confirming to the dispatcher that everyone was accounted for. He arrived separately, saw Nolan in the afternoon, and left separately. What he saw in those hours, the social dynamics, the hostile friend, the atmosphere on the island, is the independent corroboration that the investigation needs to evaluate the competing accounts of the 7 people on the boat. The grand jury will hear from the 7 people on the boat. It will hear from Jayvon Williams, and it will compare what the 7 said about the final hours with what the independent witness who was not on their boat observed. That comparison is what the grand jury process is designed to produce. Now let's also think about what it means that Nolan's last words to his best friend were, "I love you." Because in the specific emotional landscape of this case, that detail carries weight that transcends the forensic and legal analysis. When people are about to separate, when they believe they might not see someone for a while, they often say goodbye more deliberately. They express things they might not otherwise say. Nolan finding Jayvon in the crowd as soon as he arrived, telling him he loved him, that is either the spontaneous expression of a young man who was simply happy to see his best friend, or it is the specific kind of farewell that people sometimes express without knowing it is a farewell. Jayvon was not on the boat that was taking Nolan to the island. He arrived separately. Nolan found him and told him he loved him. And then, hours later, Nolan was in the water and Jayvon was on his way home on a different boat. That moment, the "I love you" at the beginning of the day, and the question of what happened between that moment and the water is what Jayvon Williams is living with. He saw his best friend for the last time at approximately 3 p.m. that afternoon. He said he watched the group getting ready to leave around that time, and then he left the island on his own boat. And then, the phone was in a house in Ocean Springs, and then Nolan was in the water. Jayvon said, "None of this adds up." Now let's also connect the dots between Jayvon's account and the specific detail about the friendly exchange with Nolan at the beginning of the day versus the accounts of what happened at the end. Jayvon saw Nolan in the morning, happy, present, telling his best friend he loved him. The witnesses who saw Nolan at approximately 6 p.m., an hour and a half after the boat left, saw him on the island, still there, still alive. Between the morning and the 6 p.m. sighting, approximately 7 to 8 hours passed. 7 to 8 hours during which the holiday unfolded, the groups mixed and separated, the alcohol flowed, the social dynamics shifted, including the hostile friend incident that Jayvon described. What happened during those 7 to 8 hours is the specific period that the investigation is trying to reconstruct. Not just the final minutes before the boat left, the whole day, the whole social environment, the whole context in which a young man who told his best friend he loved him at the start of the day ended up face down in the water at the end of it. Jayvon was there for some of that. He saw pieces of it. He described specific things, the hostile friend, the parents intervening, that tell us the day was not simply a peaceful holiday celebration. The grand jury will hear all of it. What Jayvon saw in the morning, what the 7 witnesses say about the afternoon, what the witnesses say about the 6 p.m. sighting, what the complete picture of July 4th on Horn Island actually was. Nolan found his best friend as soon as he stepped off the boat and told him he loved him. 15 minutes. 2 stories about where the phone was. None of this adds up. Let's also address the specific significance of the GiveSendGo fundraiser and what $90,000 raised by the 3 friends tells us about the legal and financial landscape of this case. Hudson, Pitalo, and Seymour launched the GiveSendGo to defend themselves against potential lawsuits and to pursue what they describe as slander and libel against them. As of August 3rd, the fundraiser had raised more than $90,000. $90,000 in a month. At the same time, the Wells family's reward fund sits at $175,000, contributed by Tyler Perry, Al Sharpton, Terrell Owens, and Dr. Benjamin Hudson, for information leading to an arrest and conviction. Two financial structures, both built around the same case, one offering money for accountability for what happened to Nolan, the other raising money to hold accountable the people who made false claims about the friends. The $175,000 is waiting for information that leads to an arrest. The $90,000 is funding the legal defense and potential offense of three young men who say they had nothing whatsoever to do with Nolan's death. The grand jury will determine whether the $175,000 ever produces an arrest. If it does, the $90,000 becomes the defense fund for whatever legal proceedings follow. If the grand jury no bills, the $90,000 funds the defamation cases against the people who made specific false claims about the friends. Money on both sides, both waiting for the same legal mechanism. The grand jury. Now let's also address something that connects Jayvon Williams' account directly to the independent autopsy's findings. Because Jayvon said he saw Nolan for the last time at approximately 3 p.m. when the group was getting ready to leave the island. At that time, Nolan appeared fine. He was present. He was engaged. The independent autopsy found deep red subcutaneous tissue at the base of Nolan's skull. It found that the cause of death was undetermined. It found that the independent pathologist cannot rule out neck injury or forced entry into the water. If Nolan was fine at 3 p.m. when Jayvon last saw him, and if something happened to him between 3 p.m. and the 6 p.m. sighting that changed his condition, the specific window between those two times is where the injury, if there was one, would have occurred. The official investigation believes it is likely an accidental drowning. The likely assessment exists alongside Jayvon's "none of this adds up." The likely assessment exists alongside the 15 minutes to retrieve the phone. The likely assessment exists alongside the sealed autopsy that the family cannot see. Jayvon was there. He knows Nolan. He says it doesn't add up. The grand jury will evaluate whether the likely assessment survives contact with the complete evidence. Now let's close by going back to the beginning of July 4th, 2026, and holding the entire day in mind as Jayvon Williams experienced it. He was supposed to be on the boat with Nolan. The boat was full. He got on a different boat. He arrived at the island. Nolan found him in the crowd and told him he loved him. He spent the day on the island. He saw the social dynamics, including a friend who was hostile and upset, parents on a boat trying to intervene. He saw Nolan for the last time at approximately 3 p.m. He got on his own boat and went home. That night, his mother Tashima got a call from Christine Wansley. Nolan was missing. Tashima tracked the phone via Life 360 to a house in Ocean Springs. She drove there. The lights were off. It took 15 minutes, 2 stories about where the phone was, and then the phone was returned. Jayvon Williams was there for the whole day, and he told CNN, "None of this adds up. I have nothing to hide. That's my boy and I want him to find justice." His best friend found him in the crowd and told him he loved him. Hours later, the phone was in a house with the lights off. 15 minutes. 2 stories. None of it adds up. The grand jury will find out why. Let's also address the specific contrast between how Jayvon Williams is engaging with this investigation and how the 3 friends on the boat are engaging with it. Because that contrast is itself information about what each group believes the investigation will find. Jayvon Williams spoke to CNN without a lawyer filtering his words. He spoke to TMZ without a lawyer filtering his words. He said he has nothing to hide. He said he wants justice for Nolan. He said none of this adds up. He spoke directly in his own voice about what he saw and what he believes. Warren Hudson gave a podcast interview through which lawyers' involvement can be inferred from the specific framing of his account. He and the other friends are now represented by 2 attorneys. 1 criminal defense, 1 defamation. They raised $90,000 on Give, Send, Go. They visited the island with legal representation. They issued a formal joint statement through their attorneys. 2 approaches to the same investigation. 1 direct and lawyerless, 1 filtered through an increasingly complex legal apparatus. That contrast does not prove anything. People retain attorneys for many legitimate reasons, including, as the friends' attorneys have noted, because they have been receiving death threats and have been subjected to social media harassment. The decision to lawyer up is not evidence of guilt, but the contrast between Jayvon's unfiltered directness, "None of this adds up, I have nothing to hide, that's my boy," And the friend's increasingly structured legal response is the specific contrast that the public is observing and interpreting. The grand jury will hear from both. Under oath. Without the filters. What Jayvon says under oath and what the three friends say under oath will be the specific comparison that the grand jury uses to evaluate the competing accounts of July 4th. Now let's also address what the satellite view of Horn Island tells us about the specific geography that Jayvon was navigating that day. Because understanding the physical layout helps contextualize what he could and could not have seen. Horn Island is 12 miles long and less than a mile wide. The western tip is where the Mac Daddy boat was anchored, where the bilge pump emergency happened, where the sea tow call was made. The northwestern tip is where Nolan's body was found. Jayvon arrived on a different boat. He saw Nolan in the morning. He watched Nolan talk with friends and with a girl in the crowd. He observed the hostile friend incident. He saw Nolan for the last time around 3 p.m. when the group was getting ready to leave. And then he left on his own boat. The specific locations where each of these events occurred, where Jayvon arrived, where he saw Nolan, where the hostile friend incident happened, where Nolan was last seen, are the specific geographic coordinates that the UCN's 22-page report may be documenting. Photos and videos from that day, submitted by people who were there, mapped to GPS coordinates. The investigation has access to all of it. The grand jury will receive whatever the investigation found useful. Jayvon was navigating that geography. He was there. He is willing to talk. He said, none of this adds up. Now, let's also think about what happens when the grand jury convenes and Jayvon Williams takes the oath. Because the specific testimony of someone who was on the island, who is not one of the contested witnesses, who says the story doesn't fit what he knows about Nolan, that testimony carries weight in a grand jury room. Grand jury testimony is not cross-examined the way trial testimony is. The prosecutor presents the case. The witnesses testify. The grand jurors ask questions. It is a relatively controlled environment designed to evaluate whether probable cause exists. When Jayvon Williams testifies about what he saw, Nolan at the start of the day, the social dynamics, the last sighting at 3 p.m., and when he says none of this adds up, the grand jury will have the specific account of someone who was there and who does not believe the official narrative fits. Combined with the sealed autopsy findings, the toxicology, the phone forensics, and the 7 witnesses who were on the boat, Jayvon's testimony will be one piece of the complete picture. The grand jury will decide whether the complete picture supports charges. Nolan told his best friend he loved him at the beginning of July 4th. 15 minutes, 2 stories. A phone in a dark house. Nolan's best friend says none of it adds up. The grand jury is coming to find out if he's right. One final thought about what Jayvon Williams represents in this investigation beyond his specific account of what he saw. Jayvon Williams is 17 years old. He lost his best friend. He was on the island the day it happened. He watched his mother drive to a house in the dark to retrieve a dead boy's phone. He saw it take 15 minutes and produce 2 contradictory stories about where the phone was, and he went on national television and said, "None of this adds up. I have nothing to hide. That's my boy, and I want him to find justice. He is not a lawyer. He is not a civil rights attorney building a legal record. He is not a defamation specialist reviewing media coverage. He is a 17-year-old from Ocean Springs, Mississippi, who lost his best friend on the 4th of July, and who is trying, with whatever tools he has available through CNN interviews and TMZ conversations, to make sure someone is held accountable." His mother, Tashema, stood on a dark porch at a house and waited 15 minutes for a phone to emerge from contradictory explanations. She is the one who got that phone to Christine Wansley. She is the one who made it possible for Christine to track the phone and confirm what had happened to it. A 17-year-old, his mother, a phone, 15 minutes, 2 stories. None of it adds up. The grand jury will tell them why. It will hear Jayvon under oath. It will hear the 7 witnesses from the boat under oath. It will have the sealed autopsy and the phone forensics and the toxicology. And when it decides whether it indicts or no bills, Jayvon Williams will finally know whether the legal process agrees with him. None of this adds up. The grand jury is coming to find out. Nolan Wells found his best friend on a crowded island and told him he loved him. Hours later, the phone was in a dark house. 15 minutes. 2 stories. The grand jury is coming. Let's address one more dimension, the racial dimension, as Jayvon Williams experiences it personally, not as a political frame, but as the specific lived reality of a 17-year-old black teenager in Mississippi. Jayvon was on that island. He saw Nolan. He left on a separate boat. His best friend did not come home. And the story that emerged, that Nolan chose to stay with a girl, is a story that Jayvon says does not match who Nolan was. Every single time, he said, Nolan always came back with the people he came with. Every single time. For Jayvon Williams, the investigation into his best friend's death is not an abstract political question about racial justice in Mississippi. It is personal. It is the specific grief of losing someone you loved and watching the explanation for that loss be something you do not believe. He went to CNN. He went to TMZ. He said, "I have nothing to hide." He said none of this adds up. The grand jury will be his specific hope that the legal process will do what he cannot do on his own, compel the truth from under oath testimony and sealed forensic evidence. He is 17 years old. He is waiting for the same answer his friend's parents are waiting for. The grand jury is coming. And when it arrives, Jayvon Williams will finally have the specific legal mechanism that can answer the question he has been asking since July 4th. None of this adds up. Tell me why. The grand jury will. Nolan found Jayvon in the crowd and told him he loved him. Hours later, his phone was in a house with the lights off. 15 minutes. 2 stories. The grand jury will explain what happened between the "I love you" and the dark house. The answer is coming. Nolan's best friend is waiting for it. His parents are waiting for it. The grand jury is the mechanism that will produce it. The investigation continues. The sealed autopsy is ready. The phone forensics are ongoing. September or October. The answer is coming. Let's also address what Hudson's account of the aftermath adds to the picture of who knew what when. Hudson said he left the island at 4:30 p.m. He ate, he slept, he went to another party. He assumed Nolan was fine and would return on someone else's boat. He said that was common practice, going to the island on one boat and returning on another. If that is true, if it is genuinely common to travel to Horn Island on one vessel and return on a different one, then Hudson's assumption that Nolan would find another way home is the assumption of someone familiar with how the island works, not the assumption of someone who knew Nolan was not going to make it home. But Jayvon Williams, who was also familiar with Horn Island social practices, who was also part of that social world, said he has never known Nolan to stay back while his friends leave. Every single time. 2 people who knew Nolan, 2 accounts of who he was and how he moved through the world. Hudson saying it was common practice to return on a different boat. Jayvon saying Nolan never stayed back. Every single time. Which account of Nolan's character is more accurate? The grand jury will hear from people who knew him throughout his life, his coaches, his teammates, his family, his best friend. The complete portrait of who Nolan Wells was, whether he was the kind of person who would voluntarily stay alone on an island with a girl he had just met, will emerge from that testimony. Jayvon said, "I've never known Nolan to stay back while his friends leave. He's always been a guy where, if he rode with you, he's going to come back with you. That's always how he's been every single time. Every single time. The grand jury will hear that, under oath, from the best friend who was there. And then it will decide." Nolan told Jayvon he loved him. 15 minutes, 2 stories. A phone in a dark house. The grand jury is the answer. The answer is coming. September or October. His parents are waiting. His best friend is waiting. The investigation continues. Let's close with the specific image that this case keeps returning to, not the forensic findings, not the legal strategies, not the competing accounts, but the human moment at the center of it all. Jayvon Williams stepped off his boat onto Horn Island on the morning of July 4th, 2026. And before he could settle in, before he could find a spot on the beach or get a drink or say hello to anyone else, Nolan found him, his best friend, the person who should have been on the same boat but wasn't because the boat was full, found him in a crowd of hundreds of people on an island 10 miles from shore. and told him he loved him. That is who Nolan Wells was. A person who sought out his best friend in a crowd to say, "I love you." A person who, in his father's words, always came back with the group. A person who always said, "Yes, sir." A person who made salmon for his family the night before he went to the island. That person, the one Jayvon knew, the one his parents knew, the one who always came back, is the person whose phone ended up in a house in Ocean Springs 15 minutes and 2 stories after his mother tried to track it down. That person is the one Jayvon Williams is fighting for when he goes on CNN without a lawyer and says, "None of this adds up." That person is the one Christine and Elmore Wonsley are waiting for the grand jury to give answers about. The grand jury is coming. The sealed autopsy is ready. The phone forensics are ongoing. The answer is coming. And when it does, when the grand jury convenes in September or October and hears Jayvon Williams under oath and the 7 witnesses and the sealed autopsy and the phone forensics, it will be answering the question that a 17-year-old best friend asked from a television studio in Ocean Springs, Mississippi. None of this adds up. Tell me why. The grand jury will. If you have any information about what happened to Nolan Wells on Horn Island on July 4th, 2026, contact the Jackson County Sheriff's Office or the FBI's Jackson Field Office. Hit the like button. Subscribe to Forensic Disconnect. Drop a comment. Do you think Jayvon Williams' testimony will change the grand jury's assessment? And what do you think those 15 minutes to get the phone actually mean? We read every single comment. We will be back tomorrow.